it takes the wise bear king to tell him who he is, to tell him that he has these powers. And that is us. Way back, talking that badonkadonk. Years ago, I would have never thought. I was already 5 years into, maybe 7, 8 years into this philosophy. Loved it, and still never thought that I would love or find much value in the symbolic, fantastical side of things. I loved the philosophical nature of the Gita, but never found myself interested that much in the Mahabharata, the great epic that is much more symbolic storytelling around the Gita, or the other great epic, which the Ramayana is even more fantastical. It's almost like the Marvel comics of philosophy, virtue, divinity, spiritual path. But in the last 2-3 years, it has been so fun to see that unfold in a really rich, meaningful way. Even the symbolism of the different deities, gods with a lowercase g, within this philosophy, or really the mythology around the philosophy. The philosophy itself doesn't have much of it, but around the philosophy, where you have these myths that are just meant to be seen as myths. You have these symbols that are meant to be symbols that point towards Brahman, towards a very monotheistic, even in the Hindu side of things, one of the first monotheistic religions in the world that we think is polytheistic with a bunch of gods. Those are really just, they're more like our saints in perhaps a Roman Catholic tradition, where they are subservient to, their virtue comes from their subservience to Brahman, to which is just Sanskrit for the vast, to the infinite God. And I just always kind of put those to the side. I was like, yeah, that's cool, but not that relevant to the philosophical concepts that I really want to understand. But like I said, in the last few years, bit by bit, the symbolism within even just a statue of Ganesha, it just blows my mind. It's basically like a 3-dimensional text, a 3-dimensional Upanishad, a belly that can digest any experience. 1 tusk instead of 2, because he's transcended world of opposites. Massive ears to be able to listen. Small mouth to not say much. Trunk that is incredibly sensitive, but also strong. A serpent tied around its belt because he's made use of desire, made use of it, not being used by it. A little vehicle of a mouse that he feeds little snacks to. It's ego, where he knows it's there, but it's always under his control. Like, that's just blows my mind how useful that becomes, not in kind of a childish, like there is a Ganesha walking around, but a visual of like, oh, that's what it looks like. To have mastery over oneself, over experience, over desire, over ego. And it still blows me away with the richness of that. And in parallel, blows me away that I'm blown away by that. But one of the mythological, fantastical, symbolic creatures within the Ramayana, it's an epic story. Oh, it's so good. If you want a summary of it, Ram Dass does a 2-part summary in his, I think it's a 1970 lecture, but it's on his podcast, Ramdass. and a space between Ram and Das. And it's so beautiful to hear his rendition of the Ramayana. But Hanuman, one of the main characters, is the chief of the monkey army. And he is, and this is what's so fun about this philosophy, is that it humanizes divinity and it divinizes humanity. It's the meeting between the two, where you have this chief of the monkey army who is supposed to be the symbolic embodiment of the intellect, the monkey mind being the army, and he's the chief. He controls it. So he has command over the monkey mind. He is the intellect with incredible devotion, infinite devotion to the divine, who is embodied in this character, Lord Rama. But the divine in Lord Rama he's almost like the least interesting character in the entirety of the Ramayana, because it's what the characters around him do that creates the narrative and the adventure. Hanuman, not the least of which, creates perhaps the most interesting of all of the storylines, because he's also divinity embodied. He is pure intellect. He's pure wisdom. But it's not a wisdom that sits idly by. He is so devoted to God, to this embodiment of God through this character, Lord Rama, that it's just fascinating to see what he does and what he doesn't do. He also has a few superpowers. He can grow as big as he wants to, and he can also shrink as little as he wants to. So this size and transformation, that's one of his superpowers. His other superpower is that he can jump infinite heights. It makes for an interesting story. And that's why these stories have been around for 3,000 years. And it makes for interesting stories, that's for sure. And the tradition and rich tradition of telling these stories is fascinating to a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old. Our 6-year-old and our 3-year-old, they love every night I tell a story about Hanuman. Most of the time, I'm just making up a new story. But they love hearing about it. So there is that fantastical entertainment value of this character. But the symbolic nature, every night that I'm telling a Hanuman story, I think about the symbolic nature of these two superpowers. It never ceases to blow me away. The ability to get as big as he needs to get, to rise to the occasion, to take on any challenge. That's a faculty of the intellect. To know what to do, what side, to get big when needed, to assert oneself when needed, but then also the power to get infinitesimally small. No ego. To get out of one's own way. The richness of the metaphor, I've never seen anything like that. His other superpower, the ability to jump infinitely high, to detach from anything, to overcome any obstacle. Maybe it's getting big, maybe it's getting small, maybe it's jumping over it. He jumps from India to Lanka, to Sri Lanka in the story, and that ability, no one else can get there. No one else can get to that part of the world because everyone else is attached. But him, with his detachment, his ability to detach, he can go anywhere. I don't need to spell out the applications of these two superpowers in our own life, and what the story tells us, we have these two superpowers. In fact, in the Ramayana, Hanuman has forgotten who he was, who he is. And it takes the wise bear king to tell him who he is, to tell him that he has these powers, and that is us. divinize humanity. Even if that divinity is there. That's what philosophy calls us, to manifest the divinity that is already within. But we are the keys to each other's locks. Sometimes it takes someone else to remind us who we are. A wise bear king, a sage, a saint, a fantastical, poetic story. But that's who you are. This divinity within that can rise to any high heights, that can minimize one's ego and get out of one's way, and go in either direction, with mastery of oneself to know which direction to go in, or the ability to detach from anything and make a leap of infinite distance towards a land, a destination, a place, an aim that you feel might be so far from you. But the distance is overcome just by remembering who you are and what you're capable of. Or maybe better said, overcome by someone reminding you of who you are and what you're capable of. Outside of the entertainment value of even the symbolic value of this character of this chief of the monkey army. The real value is that it is a reminder. Not of who you or I are capable, not of who we are capable of becoming, but a reminder of who you are already. That's today's reflection in the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.